Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. With that transfer portal window officially opening up, I think we all know Mike Norvell and this Florida State program are going to be big players over the next couple of weeks. You take a look at a couple days ago, we hopped on and talked about positions that we thought Florida State could be going after in the transfer portal. Well, now we got some names to talk about as potential targets for this Florida State program. Now, we're going to have to recircle back to this in probably 48 hours as more names enter in, but want to talk about some names that are already in the portal that I think would be really intriguing targets for this Florida State program. Fired up to get into this one, fired up for the next couple of weeks and this Florida State program. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the Florida State fans. Y'all continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the fellas. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, position groups that I left out, players that you think would be good additions for Florida State, throw them in the comments section. I always learn a ton from you guys, so let me know what you guys are thinking as well. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start at the position that I think is the biggest priority for this Florida State program, and that is that off-ball linebacker spot, right? This was a position they wanted to address in the transfer portal in the winter. They were able to get DJ Lundy back from Colorado. They were able to add Sean Murphy. And I look at this linebacker room and say, you feel really good about DJ Lundy. You feel really good about what Sean Murphy can be as a linebacker from a physical trait standpoint, but you don't really have a proven commodity in a guy like Sean Murphy. So if you're Florida State, you are looking to bring in a linebacker that has significant playing time and a guy that you bring in and kind of know what you're getting. And I think the number one target for this Florida State program and a guy that I am extremely fired up about is linebacker Elijah Herring. Now, there are a few things that really stand out to me about Elijah Herring. One, Mike Norvell gets a lot of flack about using the transfer portal. He brings in a lot of guys like this who, I mean, he's only going into his redshirt sophomore year. So Elijah Herring's a guy that, yes, you bring in through the portal, but a guy that you can also develop throughout this program over the next couple of years. But I think the second conversation is he checks the exact boxes that Florida State's looking for in terms of a linebacker addition, a guy that has played a lot of football at a high level in the Power Five. And I think that sets Florida State apart, makes him a really attractive addition is he can't transfer within the SEC. So he's a guy from Tennessee. I think Florida State is going to have probably the inside track on a guy like Elijah Herring if they do want to pursue him. You take a look at Elijah Herring, only a 12% missed tackle rate last year as a redshirt freshman, led the team in tackles, 27 run stops. I mean, high ceiling, check. A guy that's played a lot of football, check. That's exactly the boxes that you want to see checks for Florida State, bringing in a linebacker. Elijah Herring, if there were one guy that Florida State could leave this spring portal window landing, I think it would be a guy like Elijah Herring. Now, the second linebacker I want to talk about, and a really interesting name that you're seeing a lot of buzz about him returning to Michigan. There was buzz around him going to Florida State at times. Nikhai Hill-Green, and I'll say this again, he's a guy that gives you a high ceiling in that room, or a high floor, I should say, in that room, where played a lot of football, both at Michigan, both at Charlotte, was extremely productive for Charlotte last year. I think from a physical trait standpoint, he has those traits that you look for. I think Nikhai Hill-Green would be a linebacker that you add in this linebacker room and say, all right, yeah, I feel better about what this linebacker room is heading into 2024 than I did without him. Now, I would much prefer Elijah Herring because he has more eligibility. I think he's a better player. But Nikhai Hill-Green is a guy that you are comfortable starting for you in the 2024 season. Now, the next position group I want to talk about as we go back to this depth chart for Florida State, I want to look at the offensive line, and I want to say something that I think would make a lot of sense. Now, when we talked about this Florida State transfer portal needs, some of you guys said offensive tackle, and I said, I think I like the offensive tackles, the projected starters for Florida State, but you could add some depth. And again, when you're Florida State and you're trying to win and trying to achieve the goals that Mike Norvell and Florida State have, you got to be deep along the line of scrimmage, right? We talk about this all the time, winning games in November and December. You got to be deep. And a guy that I think is a really interesting, probably my favorite offensive tackle currently in the transfer portal is Andrew Chambly, coming out from Arkansas. This was a guy that was an all-SEC freshman team member last year as a redshirt freshman. In kind of the same conversation we had with a guy like Elijah Herring, Andrew Chambly can come in and be a very good football player for you in 2024, but is also a guy that's only going into his redshirt sophomore year. He's going to have 3 more years of eligibility with this Florida State program. So yes, he immediately adds talent to this Florida State program. He also gives you a piece that you can develop over the next couple of years as well. And for a guy like Andrew Chambly, 35-inch arms, massive frame, I think the upside that Andrew Chambly has is really high. So he's a good player that you add immediately to your roster in 2024. But you talk about a guy in 2025 or in 2026, Andrew Chambly could be a very, very good offensive tackle for Florida State. So again, a guy that gives you that developmental upside would make a lot of sense for Florida State. And sounds like he's kind of on the short list of guys, or I should say Andrew Chambly has a short list. Florida State's on that short list. That's what I meant to say. Now, the next position I want to talk about, in a position that we've talked about a little bit in terms of, will Florida State add a wide receiver? And if they do, what kind of wide receiver would Florida State choose to add? Keandre Lambert-Smith, for my money, is the best wide receiver in the portal right now. And I think kind of fits what we asked Florida State to potentially look at, and that is guys with proven production. You go back to this Florida State depth chart and say, Florida State has so much upside in this wide receiver room, right? Whether it's a guy like Malik Benson, whether it's a guy like Hakeem Williams, whether it's a guy like Destin Hill, who I know is banged up right now, but we all know the upside that he has. A lot of talent on this Florida State wide receiver room, not a ton of proven production. And so if you're Florida State, if you were to add a wide receiver into this wide receiver room, it'd have to be a guy that has proven production at the Power 5 level. And you look at Keandre Smith, 126 catches for 1,700 yards, 11 touchdowns in a Penn State offense that, for lack of better term, stinks out loud. He was something good that was in that passing attack. I think Keandre Lambert-Smith has the ability to work after the catch, create separation. He's a guy that I think has wide receiver 1 potential that hasn't really been able to shine because he's been in such a bad offense. I think this would make a lot of sense for this Florida State program. And I think the last position group that I would be looking for Florida State, now, a couple of you guys said the tight end position. I probably agree with that. That being said, there ain't many tight ends. Eli Stowers, coming from New Mexico State, could make sense, but there's not many tight ends as of right now that pique my interest. Some of you guys said safety. Probably would disagree with that. I think you're really loaded in the back end. I'm looking at the inside of the defensive line. And again, kind of a similar conversation that we had with the offensive line, where you want to win in November and December. There's no secret. You got to be deep along the line of scrimmage. You like what you have with Josh Farmer, Darrell Jackson, Grady Kelly, potentially Daniel Lyons. 4 guys that you feel pretty good about, maybe a few give or take. You want that number to be 6, 7, 8. And so if you're looking to add a high-impact guy on the defensive line that you can trust from a depth standpoint, I think the high-impact guy would be Jermaine Lolea. This is a guy that has played very, very good football when he's been healthy, over 1,800 snaps, a 10% pass rush win rate. I think he's a guy that immediately comes in, impacts this defensive line, but at the very least makes your numbers very good on the inside. And now the second guy that I would kind of list, and he's not necessarily the impact guy that Jermaine Lolea is, but I think an interesting portal addition in terms of depth is Isaiah Rakes. And this guy's a fire hydrant, right? 6'1", 313 pounds. You take a look at the film at Texas A&M. I mean, plays with low pads, eats up double teams, and is a guy that can be an enforcer in the run game. He's not going to give you a ton of production as a pass rusher. You have those guys that can give you that production. If you want a guy that is really going to help you win on first and second downs, continue to add depth to that defensive line, I think Isaiah Rakes is probably on that short list that would be a really good contributor for Florida State heading into 2024. And I think you look at this roster and say, I think Mike Norvell did such a good job in the winter months. There are not positions that Florida State is desperately trying to get in the portal, probably outside of linebacker, but you know Mike Norvell is going to continue to try to make this roster better. He's shown the ability to do that. He's shown the propensity to do that. The standard is national championship in Tallahassee. And so Mike Norvell is going to be a guy that is trying to get Florida State from a roster standpoint to be able to achieve that. I'm excited to see, more importantly, what names enter the portal and then what names Florida State decides to go after. Going to be an exciting next couple weeks. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Would love to hear some feedback from you guys in the comment section, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.